Technology, diversity, wine, the redwoods, and everything in between. Welcome to the Northern California Bay Area, and one show takes you inside the real estate that makes it all happen. This is By the Bay.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to By the Bay. I am your host, Dan Ancheta, and I'm grateful that you're here. Happy 2024. We're getting back in the swing of doing the podcast, so I really appreciate you liking and subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever else you're finding this. And today we have Stephanie Abercrombie from Equity Solutions, which is an appraisal management company. Stephanie has been a valuable partner of ours at Sequence Mortgage for many, many years. And I want to talk about what an appraisal management company is. We call it an AMC, right? Yes. And what Equity Solutions does to help the overall real estate process and buying and selling real estate when it comes to like residential real estate. So welcome to the show. Thanks for making the trip out here because your home base is in Sacramento,
yes.
Roseville.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you too.
It's funny because we talk all the time.
I know.
But I think this is like maybe the second or third time that we've actually gotten together over all these years.
I feel like I know you personally,
Isn't that funny?
I do.
Right.
Yeah, which
That's
I
so
do
funny.
because text and phone, but yeah.
Yes. You're like one of my, I think if we look at the stats of like who I call and text the most during the real estate times, it's probably you.
Yeah.
You're up there on that list.
And I appreciate
you and my processor.
I appreciate your loyalty.
Well, thank you.
Much.
Appreciate you. So AMCs, appraisal management companies, why do they exist?
So back in 2008, around that time, 2007, there was the whole real estate fall down debacle. And in order to protect the values so that banks are not making bad risk decisions and stuff, they created AMCs, appraisal management companies, to do the process, the middleman, communicating with the appraiser and communicating with the lender, so them two aren't communicating about value.
Got it. So I got into the mortgage world going on 8 years ago now, I think. I'll look at my license. I think so, 8 years. And so I don't know the world before appraisal management companies.
Yeah.
So what was happening before? Just I would call my buddy who was an appraiser and they would go out and appraise the property?
Yeah, so what was happening, and also appraisers probably felt a lot of pressure to, their best friend, Dan, over here at this mortgage company, needs this value, and
hey buddy, if it doesn't come in at 800,
yes.
I'm going to have a problem, and then they make it work.
They felt the pressure and maybe make it work a little bit. I'm not saying that absolutely happened all the time, but the AMCs help minimize that from happening.
Got it.
Because there's not that, loan officers can't say, I want a certain appraiser for this property.
Right.
There's a rotation going on.
Right.
There's
it's kind of randomized
yes.
where whoever is available to do it within a time period and like at the right cost or whatever, they take the deal, right?
Protections put into place, so we can protect that a little bit.
Right. So this goes back to like the appraisal independence requirements,
yes.
right? And that's like what Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are requiring, that I as the lender don't have influence over the valuation,
yes.
the value of the property.
Yeah,
right?
you as a lender don't have undue biased pressure,
Sure.
whatever, to the appraiser to come in at a certain value. It's kind of just leaving in the hands of someone else. And so when it comes in, you don't even necessarily know who the appraiser is until you see the report.
Right, exactly. I one of the first things I do is look at when I get the report,
yes.
I review it and look at the pictures and other things like that. And I always look to see who's the appraiser. And I don't know until I actually physically have the report back.
And I think what AMCs really help on that process too, besides all that stuff and the bias and all that stuff, is we're keeping data on the appraisers. So if someone's habitually coming in low all the time, that maybe there's something wrong there. Maybe they're over-evaluating. Maybe they're, it's not necessarily saying something's wrong, but it starts keeping data on, all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Like if they're late, are they on time?
Well, I know that when we've done, tight time frames, I might call you and say, obviously, I can't tell you who to put on this, but I do need someone who's going to get it in on time because we're like on a super tight timeline. And then, you'll go and talk to the different appraisers that might take the order and, hey, what's your workload look like? Can you actually get this done by Friday? Because we have a crazy rush and we're willing to pay for the rush and do all these other things. And that's super helpful in managing the timelines to make sure that, if we're committing to our appraisal contingency in 5 days, that, you know, I can't, I'm not talking to the appraiser to make sure it can happen. So you're kind of doing that. Is that part of your like
Yes,
day-to-day?
yes. So, and also too, you guys don't necessarily know about the property except for what the borrower or maybe the agent's telling you.
Right.
And that can be a completely different, perspective
Right.
than an appraiser point of view. And I'm not an appraiser, but I talk to the appraisers. And so I'm kind of in the middle where obviously my clients are the lenders and the appraisers, so I'm walking a tightrope. But yes, I want to say, can you do it on this timeline?
Right.
Can you do this? Or what do you think? Sometimes you're not sure about the value, and we can kind of get an idea of what comps are out there.
Yeah.
And the appraisers are the best ones to talk to about that. They
Yeah.
know that stuff.
I've always thought it's interesting that, an economic, like, educational economic basis, the value of a property or value of anything, any item, is where a seller's willing to sell and a buyer's willing to buy. And when those lines intersect, or that one point and when those lines intersect, that is the value. Yeah. And I just always like kind of laugh because, like, if you have a contract where a seller's willing to sell and a buyer's willing to buy, like it's 800,000, whatever that number is, the appraiser's opinion is not necessarily the value, or the value is what the contract is, right? But the appraiser's opinion is verifying that the bank's collateral is not outside of like a certain what's the word I'm looking for? It's not outside like a certain.
They don't want a loan on something that they can't get their money back on.
Right, and so like
happens.
It's safeguarding against. I love this house. I have to have this house.
Yes.
I'm going to overpay for this house because I love it so much as sentimental value to me, or for whatever reason. So the appraisal actually protects the lender and the client, really, so they actually know like what it would sell for without maybe those emotional kind of
because they have
ties to it.
They have to support their opinion
Right.
with data.
Right.
So if the data's not there, they can't support it. So that's why comps are so important.
Right. So they're looking at comparable sales, right? So what have other similar houses in the area sold for? And they're adjusting for number of bedrooms and square footage and location and things like condition, right?
Yes.
Those things.
Yes.
And they're also looking at a replacement value, which is like if we had to rebuild this house, what would it cost to rebuild it?
Yes.
Right today.
Yes.
And they kind of average those things out, or they look at both sides of that replacement value and comparable sales, and then they actually get a copy of the contract, right? So they know what the house is in contract for.
They get the copy of the contract. That's why it's so important for real estate agents to make sure those contracts are correct.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, you think it doesn't matter, but it does, because sometimes they're trying to support the value.
Right.
So if they're looking at the wrong, maybe the first, contract offer or
Right,
something.
right.
And
There's a
looking at-
counter, there's
Exactly.
multiple counters going back and forth.
Exactly, and they're thinking, and they're going to be a little conservative sometimes, so they're going to go off of that, not, and support that price. So
Yeah.
that's why it's important to get those right.
Speaking of realtors, what do you think realtors don't do right or get wrong when it comes to appraisals?
So realtors are amazing partners, and
Yes.
we obviously all need them. They need us, and you work partners with them and
Yes.
stuff. I think a lot of times realtors are they have the misconception that square footage is price per square foot. So they concentrate on, it's this much in this area, the square footage. How come my appraisal, this house is this big? How come,
Right.
and at this square footage, why didn't it come in at this price?
Right.
So that is a huge number one misconception. They do not go by square footage. It works out by square footage, and I think eventually, and I think this is in the works, that they're going to take that off, the price per square foot, off the form.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because that's a big misconception, and buyers, borrowers, homeowners, real estate agents, they're focusing on the price per square foot, and they don't do that at all. It just works out to become a number, but it's based on comps. It's based on market, what they can, what people are going to buy the house for, not based on square footage price.
It's really interesting because, I think maybe I might be wrong, but it seems like the smaller the square footage, the higher the price per square foot, and then the bigger the house, you usually get lower price per square foot, right? So you might have like a like anecdotally, we have a house on the east side of town here, and it's like 1,350 square feet, and the neighbor sold for 800 something thousand, and so if you work that out, it's like $700 a square foot or something like that. Where if you take that same $700 a square foot and you try to apply it to a 3,200 square foot house in the same neighborhood, that's like 2.1 million or something like that, and that would never comp out that way. Does that make sense?
Exactly.
Right.
So that's why you don't want to multiply out the 700 per square foot to the 4,000 square foot house.
Right. It just doesn't work out that way.
No.
So anyway, it's really interesting to see how those reports come together, and looking at the different comparable sales, and especially in the markets that we've seen as interest rates have changed. We've seen accelerating markets and slowing down markets and sellers markets and buyers markets, and that data tends to lag a little bit, right? So there's all these adjustments and corrections that the appraiser has to make the report relevant to this moment, because you're looking at sales maybe that happened 6 months ago, but 6 months ago rates were 8%.
Yeah.
Right, and they're not that anymore.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating work.
Yeah, and I think that the price per square foot, I think that that is probably the main thing that I want to concentrate on, because the real estate world is so focused on the price per square footage, and they think value's low because of that, and I think maybe sometimes they price it based on that. So we just got to understand that you're right, the smaller house is better, and that's why they say don't be the nicest house in the neighborhood, because it all kind of averages out on what the market can support, and
Yeah, it's well, it's interesting because they have those, like when you watch those real estate TV shows, it shows like the price per square foot and then like the commission total, and everyone like focuses on those numbers, and it's like, oh my gosh, like that's $1,000 a square foot house or whatever, and it doesn't necessarily translate from house to house and neighborhood to neighborhood. It kind of reminds me of like we talked to an ADU expert, which we should talk about ADUs. And they're talking about the incremental cost of building an ADU as opposed to like a single family house is actually not that dissimilar, because you're spending all the money on all the expensive stuff, the kitchen and the plumbing, that's all expensive stuff, and you still need that in a tiny little house. The bedrooms that you add on are relatively inexpensive, right? So it's not definitely, you can't just go square footage to square footage, because there's going to be a mismatch, because there's systems and things that have to be there. And you still need a heater, whether your house is 1,500 square feet or 2,000 square feet. And there's still like costs to go and replace those things. And anyway, it's very interesting that how all these kind of worlds come together, right? Because you guys are doing a bunch of number crunching and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
The ADU thing can be so confusing.
It's so confusing.
Yes, we just built in-law quarters, and even going to go get it permitted, they were asking me, is it an ADU or is it that? And even being in the appraisal world, I was getting confused.
It's super confusing. Is it an ADU? Is it
and every county has
junior
their own rules.
ADU?
Yeah.
Is it a this? Is it a that? It's super, super confusing. We actually need to have a ADU expert that's in Napa, Ryan, to come back on the show. He was on the show last year. It was 2 years ago, gosh. Anyway, and it's really fascinating, all these different, state bills and things that have gone through to allow you to build ADUs. And then relevant to this conversation, that like Fannie Mae changed their rules as if we can count the income from an accessory dwelling unit. It wasn't allowed before, but now it is for qualifying income for a primary residence purchase. So you can buy it as a single family primary residence with an accessory dwelling and count a portion of that income. So that's being added to the appraisals, because we're asking for the opinion of the rental income, right? Which is another thing that you guys do, right? Well, appraisers do, because you're not an appraiser, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating just to see how that's changing the ability to qualify for these properties and really helping with multi-generational housing.
Oh,
right?
For sure.
So your in-law unit that you built, is that for children or for parents?
So my mother-in-law passed away this last year.
So sorry to hear that.
Thank you. And then my father-in-law moved in. He's 88 years old. Been an adjustment for our family, but it's also such a beautiful thing. And anyway, so he lives in the kind of like an apartment. It's like a big studio.
Nice.
We ended up not, it's in-law quarters, but we ended up not doing the kitchen. So he has like a mini kitchen or something like that. He comes and uses our kitchen, but It's been wonderful. It's
Well, he's family, right? So
yes,
it comes in.
of course.
It's like a rental.
Of
You're
course.
like, don't want the.
Yeah, but he's not renting. He just comes and So it's kind
That's
of
cool.
nice.
He has his own private space. And,
He does.
And that multi-generational housing solution is so
It's so
cool and
you
critical.
see it everywhere now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, and all those rules changing have really helped with that.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
The unintended consequence that we see, though, is there's a lot of confusion about what is an accessory dwelling, what's not, what can qualify, what's, what is actually a second unit and like is a duplex as opposed to a accessory dwelling. And there's all these fine lines and
something you think is a
right.
like, let's say you think it's like a townhome,
Right.
but it's a duplex or it's all that
Well, what
stuff.
if I have a 1,200 square foot primary residence and a 1,000 square foot ADU?
Yeah.
Like, those are very, very similar,
Yeah.
right, in size.
And that's where we lean on the appraisers to help us out
Right.
and lean us in the right directions. And sometimes it can go both ways.
Right.
It just
And
depends,
it depends on the zoning, and it depends
Exactly.
on the mapping, and all
and
sorts
if there's
of other.
another property just like it.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, that's like the main thing. It's always the main thing is comps.
Yeah. Yes. So let's talk about comps. So we do a good amount of business up in like Russian River area, and there's a very atypical properties up there, right? So we get you've done a geodesic dome for us, all sorts of weird properties,
Yeah.
log houses, and all sorts of stuff. Is there like a list of like the bizarro properties that the appraisers go to? How do they find those things? How do they?
Well, there's certain appraisers that are really good at it.
Okay.
There's certain ones that don't want to touch it because they don't have the experience with it. So, the ones to call when you get like, I think you're the one who gave me that one in Santa Cruz, the writer about it.
I don't know.
Okay.
It's possible.
Yes, it's a while ago. But the bathroom was outside.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
That was us.
The shower was outside.
Yes, there was that one, and then we also sent you the one up in Guerneville that had the bathroom that was in a separate building from the main house. There was like a deck they had to walk across. That was weird.
So there's things like that
Yeah.
that certain lenders will not even touch.
Yeah.
And, good thing that you will do stuff like that. And also us, we will, contact the appraiser and
Right.
find the right appraiser for that property.
Right. So this is like that local expert thing, because especially up in the Russian River area, they have very odd septic systems and redwood boxes and all sorts of stuff that if an outside appraiser from outside the area comes in, they're going to go, what in the world is
Yes,
this? This is not something I've
exactly.
ever seen before. How do I even comp this?
Or they say, oh, it can't be done.
Can't be done,
And they're wrong. It can be, but you have to find the appraiser that will think outside the box. And that's where it's really important that someone, in the AMC world calls the appraiser and just speaks to them and tells them, this is what we have.
Right.
How do we go about it? And you'll find an appraiser and you talk to him. Some are not helpful and some are so helpful. And you kind of learn which ones those are. And,
Right.
They educate you and help you and tell you, okay, this needs to be changed. And then you let your people know.
Sure. What do you think about, so a lot of people who listen to the show are home buyers, right? So is there any advice that you have for someone who's buying a house that's having an appraisal done, when that appraisal is happening? Do you think they should be at the property with the appraiser? What are your thoughts on the consumer experience?
So the buyer?
The buyer.
I don't think the buyer should be there.
Okay.
I think that the buyer, it's just a process that has to happen for the loan. It's not necessarily for the buyer.
Right.
I know that sounds crazy, but the intended user is the lender. I think that they're doing what they got to do, and the buyer being there is not going to be helpful to them. And sometimes they think it's an inspection thing, like
Right.
a building inspector or something.
That's really important. I said we should go back. That should be something that we talk about.
Yeah.
An appraisal is not a home inspection.
No.
And a home inspection is not an appraisal.
No.
And people get that confused because they're like, oh, my realtor's asking me to pay for this home inspection, but I thought I already paid for that when for you. And I'm like, no, they're completely different things.
Yes, and they can hurt the appraisal process if they think it's kind of the same. So let's say a buyer points out something, why is this happening or whatever.
Sure.
The appraiser's not the expert on it. So all of a sudden the appraiser is going to call out some sort of certification
Right.
for whatever the buyer pointed out, which, okay, in the end, maybe that's good for the buyer, but they should be pointing that out to a home inspector,
Right.
not to the appraiser, because that just delays the process.
Right.
And,
So the appraiser's responsibility is value and condition, right? Because they are making comments about safety and soundness of the property. If there's, we just had one that was a small deck that was missing part of a handrail. And we had to send it back to the appraiser to comment if there was a health and safety issue with that. And they said no, because it was like one step or something like that. Not required.
Yeah.
So there is some health and safety, visually, if they see wires hanging out of the wall, or the water heater is not double strapped, or they're missing smoke detectors or carbon monoxide.
Or there's no heater.
There's
Maybe
no heater.
The person went in the summer,
Right.
and there's supposed to be one.
So they are looking at some of the physical conditions of stuff, but they're not testing outlets and crawling the crawl space to look at the insulation and, checking the electrical panel and doing all that other stuff that a home inspector would do.
Yeah.
Right.
For FHA, they are doing a little bit more than normal. They are checking the water. They're checking to make sure the electricity works, and they're looking at the crawl space. Are they inspecting it? No. They're just, taking a picture of it and making sure. If the water's not turned on, it needs to be turned on.
Right.
Things like that. But
Heater has to work.
Yes.
And they're looking for any visible damage. We actually had one called out one time on an FHA appraisal that they thought there was mold, and they called out for we had to do a mold inspection, so we had to go scrape off something to make sure it wasn't a hazard, which is, like you said earlier, it's good for the buyer. I'm glad it turns out it wasn't.
Yeah.
But it looked like it, and no one else made a comment about it, so let's make sure that there's not something hazardous here.
Yeah.
Right? So anyway, what else should anything else that realtors should be doing differently when it comes to the overall appraisal process?
Well, I think realtors, let's say, the realtors that are just coming into the realtor world, I think coming in and saying everything about the property to the appraiser, I don't think that's necessarily a good idea, because that also creates delays. Yes, they're being informative and all that stuff, but you don't want to create the delays. I think that if there's any sort of thing you want to call out or anything, you do it within a home inspector or something like that. But I think, and also too, concentrating too much on the value. Yes, if you think these are some comps, this is what I came up, leave it there on the counter.
Sure.
This is how I came up, appraisers can take it or they cannot take it. But most appraisers are going to say thank you and take them and look at them. Are they going to use them? Maybe, maybe not. And sometimes it is helpful.
Right.
But I just think kind of just stay away from it and step back. Appraisers do want to see things go smoothly and go through as much as possible. And sometimes the value is just not there. But I think that we just have to trust that process and go through it.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your company. What makes you guys different than, because there's a bunch of AMCs out there.
Oh my gosh, there's so many.
A lot.
Yes.
Like more than you would think.
Absolutely. More, and a lot of them are getting bought out by bigger companies, so they have different names, but
market
they're all
consolidation.
Yes, and then eventually they'll all become one name.
Got it.
We're owned by appraisers.
So Equity Solutions.
Yeah, Equity Solutions by a few appraisers, and there's quite a few partners.
Okay.
They're involved in the daily aspect. A couple of them still appraise, and even some for our clients. In a roundabout, very air compliant way. But yes, so we do national appraisals everywhere. I think what I really like about this company is that they allow us to do what we do, and they don't, they're not holding your hand the entire time, but they are giving you the support that we need. I've been there almost 2 years now, which time flies, doesn't it?
It's crazy, because I was like, before we started recording, I was like, I know, like, you're our person, right?
Yeah.
And you were with another company,
Yeah.
and but you're our rep, right? So we like are loyal to you, and like, your company's great,
Yeah.
right? But really, it's kind of similar to the mortgage world, where we've changed companies a few times,
Yeah.
and our clients and our partners stick with us because of our relationships, and
Exactly.
we just make sure that we're aligned with the right company, which it seems like you've done. They've done a really great job for us.
Yeah, I'm really happy there.
How did you get into the appraisal world?
So I needed a change.
Okay.
So I've always been in sales.
Okay.
So as you know, because you're also sales,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't matter what you sell. it is always the same thing, but you have to be excited about what you sell.
Right.
So at first, I had a friend who's actually, he worked for Finance of America, and he was like their appraisal. He used to call himself the sheriff of the industry.
Oh boy.
and he, when I was reaching out for jobs, and I was asked him, is there anything, I wasn't sure what he did. I thought he owned his own company. I wasn't sure. He's like, you should check into appraisal management. And so I interviewed with a couple companies, and I ended up starting out in the appraisal world. And I thought it was fun. I think the misconception that loan officers, lenders, I thought it was going to be very stuffy, and no, you guys are so much fun. I made a lot of friends in this business, and I love it. I've been in it for almost 8 years now.
Wow.
Yeah. So I guess there's no real, and I had to learn, just by trial and error, and every day I'm sure you do that too.
Yeah.
You can ask the same question all the time, and it's the same answer, but it's so many different scenarios and so many different rules that change all the time. So
yeah. Well, I will give you a plug that if if any lenders are out there listening to this, and you are not thrilled with your appraisal management company, definitely call Stephanie. She does an amazing job. She's available all the time. I text her and call her and bug her all sorts of weird hours and times, and she's super responsive and gets the job done. And you've been a really essential partner to us, especially during the crazy refi boom and all the crazy times. I remember, we had 40 or 50 appraisals going at one time.
We were talking 10 times a day.
Seriously, and
Crazy.
it was like, I need a condition on this one. What happened with that? When do we think that's going to get done? And never phased you, and was just kind of like, let's just get it done. And really great partnership. So I really, really appreciate you, and happy to endorse you if anyone's looking for a new AMC, because of all this consolidation and people getting out of the business and stuff like that. I think there's probably similar consolidation in your world than there is in ours.
And honestly, you can talk to me about anything that has to do in the appraisal world or whatever.
Or personal stuff too. I just need some advice, so just call.
I'm not the best with personal stuff, but anything that you in the appraisal world that maybe isn't, that you're not sure if it's air compliant or whatever. I'm not the appraiser, so I'll help you with
I call you with what do you think about this? Do you think we can get an appraisal on this? Do you think this, and we just have a conversation, and it's like,
I'm not going to make up an answer. I'll find out for you.
Right.
For sure.
Take it to someone and show them and see what they get, and it helps us with our process, and helps our realtor partners and our clients to make the best financial decisions that they can make, and that's what we're all here for. So. Yeah. Well, hey, I really appreciate you coming on the show, and I think it's one of those things that it's part of the overall real estate process that we don't give a lot of attention to, right? Because it's just kind of like this thing that has to happen, but it's really, really important. And I appreciate your partnership and your friendship, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Dan.
Right on.
Thank you.
See ya.
Stay up to date with Bay Area real estate. Hit subscribe now if you haven't already. Did you enjoy this episode? We love reviews in the Apple Podcasts app. We'll read yours on the show. This is By the Bay.
Land and Ear Media.